Hi, Andreas from Toddle here. About 2 weeks ago, a video came out that caused quite a bit of stir in the NoCode community. It was titled, "NoCode App Development is a Trap." So I thought today I would go through the video and sort of add some of my personal comments as a founder of a NoCode company. So without any further ado, let's jump in.
No-code app development is a trap. I fell into this trap and lost a lot of money. So this is my story.
Okay, so straight off the bat, we're hitting the ground running. She's not holding back, and I mean, honestly, I generally like that, but it's also some strong statements. So let's see how she backs it up.
One day I had an idea. I know, real of me to have an idea. But I thought, hang on, this idea would make a great app. I didn't know how to build mobile apps. I haven't done it at that stage, but I did know how to code, just not mobile apps. And I did some research and I figured I should just do no code. It was 2023 at that stage. And I thought, hey, the technology must be out there. And to be honest, I just didn't want to learn a new programming language.
So I think that's actually quite a common way that people find no code. We see a lot of people in Toddle that are coming in with this big idea for an app, and they often haven't really built anything before. I think she's actually, since she's coded before, she already sounds like in the more advanced part of the sort of spectrum of developer. But we get a lot of people coming in that sort of have this idea for an app and never really tried to build anything before. And we actually tend to sort of encourage people to put their idea aside, at least for the first week, and spend some time learning how the platform works, learning a little bit about programming and web development to get into how the platform works. Because having that first project can be a great driver, but it can also actually be a little bit of a blocker, because you want to get started building that thing, but maybe the first problem you need to solve isn't necessarily the easiest one to get started on, right? Oh.
So I opted for a platform called Flutter Flow. And Flutter Flow is a no-code app development platform. It is probably one of the most popular no-code platforms out there. And on Flutter Flow, you can actually build iOS and Android apps without using code. The backend of Flutter Flow is actually the language Flutter, but the idea here is that you will not be programming, you won't be actually coding in Flutter. It's more of a drag and drop platform that you can start building apps. And so I began to build my app. And I think I started the process correctly. I looked at their documentation. I watched a bunch of YouTube tutorials. I created the wireframe on Balsamiq. I would say
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I think she did the right thing. Go and check out the platform, read the documentation, watch some tutorials, understand a bit about what the platform could do ahead of time. It can be really tempting to just jump in, and I mean, by all means, if you're that type of person, go and do that. But with an expectation that for these platforms like Flutter Flow, for example, which lets you create fairly complex things, and especially Toddle, you're going to want to spend a little time learning it, right? It's not all going to be intuitive if you never built anything like that before.
I was around 20 to 30% complete when things just started not looking right. I wanted to do specific things on my app, which I thought was reasonably easy, but I just couldn't do it. And because it wasn't a default feature, I thought, hang on, I know with Flutter Flow, if you want that uniqueness, that ability to customize things, you can create a custom widget, but I couldn't do that because it actually...
So I think this is something that most people will run into at some point with any visual development or no-code platform, which is obviously you want to be able to do as much as possible on what we call the happy path. So the happy path is when you're building your tool, everything's working, you get to use the tool for all the things it does best, and you're just building your application, right? And unfortunately, occasionally we need to step a little bit off the happy path for a second, because there'll be some small bumps. Maybe there's a certain feature you really need to do, or need that isn't in the platform yet, or maybe you're just hitting, like the thing you need to build is so uncommon that it's not something the platform's optimized for. So the reality is no matter what platform you're going to end up with, if you want to keep building it and scale it, you'll have to hit a point where you'll have to add some custom code eventually.
Actually didn't work. So I reached a roadblock and I could not continue. So then I thought, I'm having so many issues. Surely it's not me. And I was right. It is not only me. 5 months ago, there was a post on Reddit under the Flutter dev subreddit. And it said, Flutterflow raised 25.5 million. Anyway, that post actually wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was the comment below it. Now, it is quite a long comment, but it summarized my issues that I was having with Flutterflow. I was quite active in the Flutterflow environment for about 1.5 years. At the time, I was very happy with it, to be honest. I would say I was in the 10 to 90% project completion phase of my app. However, when I got to the last 10%, I realized that Flutterflow is a 90% completion product. They go on to say, in my experience, when I hit the 90% and started seeing the cracks, I thought, oh well, that sucks. Luckily, I can add a custom widget. So I started there. And wow, adding custom widgets and trying to integrate them into the Flutterflow codebase without any sort of error logging was awful. After this,
Okay, so as I mentioned, like it's kind of a necessity. Like it's gonna happen with any platform in the early days, right? That you're gonna hit some limit of what the platform can do. Either it can't do it yet, or it's just like there isn't like a package, or like in Toddle we have packages that allows our community to extend Toddle functionality and basically build stuff and share it, right? So in the early days, you're gonna find that there are gonna be limitations, right? Because it's almost impossible for one company to build a platform that can cover the whole functionality spectrum of, let's say, the web platform, right? There's so many things, there's so many APIs, there's so many things you can do, and it's a moving target, right? They're adding new features all the time. Like there are great features coming out. We just got like dialogue elements coming out, native dialogue elements on the web. We got popover. We got speculative rendering, like all sorts of things. Just recently, things we've added to Toddle. There's all sorts of things happening all the time. So for a platform to first of all get to a point where it covers everything and then keep up, it's a ton of work. And so there's always going to be a point when that platform is either it's because the platform is behind, or really it's part of the ecosystem of packages, etc. you can store for it that's not quite big enough to cover everything yet, right? So you're going to find that with every platform, and therefore it's really important that your platform has a good solution to this. Like it needs a good escape hatch. It needs a good way of extending the platform with some custom code, right? It's something we paid a lot of attention, we really cared a lot about in Toddle to make sure we did that in a really good way. And we focused a lot on this idea that it's not just use coding your component whenever you hit an edge, but actually allowing you to create custom actions in Toddle that you can then reuse everywhere. So that once you've solved that problem, that sort of shortcoming once, it's now, you basically solved it forever. And you can even create a package and share that package with other people building in Toddle so that they don't have to deal with it anymore. And the idea here is that over time, eventually we'll start closing these gaps, and eventually people won't have to add any JavaScript code or anything to the apps, right? So it's, all I'm saying is it's really important that this is a thought out system. Like I haven't tried Flutter Flow very much, so I haven't dealt with this at all. So I don't know what theirs is, but of course, if it's anything like what they're describing here, that's very unfortunate.
I thought, well, I might as well find a dev to help. I then hire Bluecry to help with one of their custom packages, and they couldn't figure it out either. Finally, I thought, that sucks. I guess I have hit the limit of Flutterflow and need to download the code. So in Flutterflow, you do have the option of...
Right, so that's kind of the worst case scenario, right? That's sad. Because if you get to a point where you want to sort of download the code from your NoCode platform, that essentially means that the platform has failed you, right? At that point, you were almost always better off not picking NoCode to begin with. So I think that's very unfortunate. I would also say if this idea that you can just download code from a like visual development or no-code platform, and then just hire a dev or learn how to program and keep going with that, I think that's probably a bit naive. In reality, it's very unlikely that code is particularly maintainable or easy to work with. And I think as a developer, as a coder, right, even inheriting a project from other developers is something I generally dread, because like, what do they come up with now? What is this going to look like? What is the state of this thing going to be, right? But if it's automatically generated from a platform, I would expect it to be much worse. And the reason for that is actually that's not the platform's job, right? The platform's job is to be a visual development environment and be the best one it can be. And then the code that comes out, if you want to put it that way, on the other end, should be performant. It should be optimized for running in the browser. But the point here is not reading code, right? And so the set of requirements for making something that works well with the no-code platforms and that generates something that's performant, and then also something that's readable, those are two different sets. And so it's a lot of work to figure out how to make something very readable, and like actually generate code that's very readable from a no-code platform. And any time spent on that, like for a team to go and spend time and say, we want to produce readable output, well, that's only really relevant if the core premise and core value prop of your product failed, right? Like, this is only something you want to do when the platform basically isn't doing what it promised to do. So any time spent on that, I would always argue that's better spent on actually making the platform better and deliver on the promises it made.
Of downloading your code base and getting the physical code after you develop your app. So I did, and dear Lord, that code base was awful. It was straight up horrible. Spaghetti was an understatement. So then I thought, well, I need someone with more experience because this is getting out of control. So I hired a dev. They took one look and tried and then said, we can rebuild it in 2 weeks. And so we did.
Yeah. So that would be my expectation too. I don't see that like exporting that code base and then using that as a jump on point going forward is almost certainly not going to be better than rebuilding. Like, I always say that you should never do a rewrite, right? Because it never ends out particularly smooth. In this case, clearly they hadn't gotten very far. If you can rebuild in 2 weeks, you haven't really lost very much. So it's obviously the right choice. If you're 6 months down the line, it's a lot harder. But it's probably still the right call, because if you don't understand your code base, right, then it gets really hard to make any changes to it. And again, I wouldn't expect this to be readable. I would expect this to be very hard to understand, because again, you're optimizing for a visual platform that is and that's very different than for readable code.
We are finally in a good place, but Flutter Flow just about sank our startup. And what this person has experienced, and what many people have experienced with Flutter Flow, was the same thing that I experienced. When I downloaded my Flutter Flow code, it was terrible. And I don't even code in Flutter, but I realized it was terrible. There were so many errors, and I could tell because at this stage I started to actually learn Flutter to understand my Flutter Flow code. And it just looked wrong. And it's not only Flutter that has these issues. People also posted similar issues with another very popular no-code platform called Bubble. Here, users mention a lot of issues with containers and trying to customize their web app that they are trying to build. Another one also says that there are huge scalability issues with Bubble. Now, I also did some research on Bubble when I wanted to design the no-code app. And again, I thought Bubble was a fully scaled solution. It's not. This Medium article actually speaks about the disadvantages of Bubble, and they put it in a nice way. A problem I saw with Bubble was your ability to customize. Because much of the code is pre-made, you kind of have to rely on Bubble styles for a lot of the apps you want to build. There are ways to customize, and Bubble provides plugins from third-party APIs that you can use. But for the most part, I can see someone that wants a highly customizable app having problems.
Yeah, so this is I think quite an interesting point. So a lot of time when we're looking at no-code or visual development platforms, you often work at what we call a very high abstraction level. Now, what do I mean by that? So when we talk about a high abstraction, we're talking about you're working with interfaces, components, etc., that do a lot, where you have to give them very little input and they'll do a lot. So one of my favorite examples here is the platform Softer, where they have these things called blocks, and you can pull in blocks to your app. And it's actually, at least to my knowledge, and I apologize if I'm not doing it justice here, but it's actually the only way you build apps in Softer, right? You combine these blocks, and these are sort of large pre-built blocks, and there's a ton of them in Softer, right? So you can do a lot of things. It's a really powerful platform, but you are, as long as you stay within their sort of what's called paradigm of saying you have these blocks, and the blocks can be like a user list, and you will provide it with some data source of users, and then it'll render out all these users, and there'll be some buttons, and you can then sort of hook them up to some specific actions, right? But everything is kind of pre-built and preset. A low-level abstraction, that's what we call a high-level abstraction, right? You drop in a block, and there it is. You wire up to data structure. Now, everything underneath, there's 1,000 things underneath that it does for you. Now, low-level abstraction would be something like a button or an input field or an image, right? These are relatively simple building blocks. They're much, much simpler building blocks. So you would need to put a lot of those together to build something like a user list. And therefore it takes a lot longer to build the same thing. But on the flip side, you get complete control of how you do that, right? So you really can just go and say, well, I want to build a user list, and I want it to look and feel exactly like my user list, right? And for the platforms that work primarily with high abstractions, that's just not an option, right? Like you have to work with it within the tools they give you. And the problem here is often that, as for some projects, this is great. Like that's exactly what you need. If you're building like internal tools, a lot of time, it's perfectly fine. You're willing to make these sort of trade-offs for speed, right? Like development speed, right? But if you're building a SaaS business, you're building something more complex and something more, you're basically shaping a company around, that's probably not a trade-off you're willing to make. And you might occasionally realize that a little bit late, that actually some of the limitations that the platform puts on you to make development faster is actually not trade-offs you're willing to make. And hopefully you learn this as early as possible. So this is sort of one of the ways that no-code platforms, like one of the ways we can make software or programming easier, right? And none of this, like the higher, lower abstraction level, this is not specific to no-code platforms. We see the same thing in code. You can have there are libraries that provide you with a lot of functionality that's very high level, like just plug in this thing and it'll basically do everything for you. Like here's a go create a color picker, right? And put in the color picker and give it a little bit of config info, and it's gonna render and do everything you need, right? Like there's very little you actually need, but also very little you can do to configure these things, right? It'll look and feel like the way it was programmed, right? And the other end of that is, of course, working directly with HTML and CSS, which basically like gives you the full freedom to build whatever it is you want. Finding good abstractions is honestly, which is what we call these abstraction levels, like finding good, powerful abstractions that both makes you go faster, but are also flexible, is really hard. Like it's really, really hard. The best examples we've seen so far are the modern frameworks like React, Vue, Angular, and there's a ton more now. And they all created this basic abstractions around components and about this reactive programming model of how to build components. And it's the same model, or it's exactly the same model that Toddle has adopted. We basically took all the learnings from these like over a decade of framework technology in JavaScript being developed and applied the same thing in Toddle, because it really does work. And it's abstraction level that both makes you a lot faster than if you had to do all the same work without a framework. But at the same time, it still doesn't really take away your freedom. Like you still get to do all the same things. The easy way to Like it's still very flexible, right? But yeah, these abstractions are hard. They're very hard. And the fact that we're switching into a no code from a code, like that doesn't make any change in the abstraction levels. Like it'll be every bit as, like, it's the same trade-offs you have either place. Now, the other way you can make programming simpler, one way is creating high abstractions. So you basically, as an end programmer using this, there's just less things you have to deal with because you don't have to worry about how each component works. You just have to plug them and use them, right? The other way is just to create better tools. Like, so instead of having to remember how to type out like a drop shadow in CSS, for example, we recently released our drop shadow tool where you can just kind of drag it around and adjust it, right? And so we didn't change the abstraction level. Like, you're still one-to-one working with the underlying CSS, but the tool makes it a lot easier to work with. And I think that's actually where visual development is interesting. We can create higher or lower level abstraction code as well. That doesn't necessarily warrant a visual programming platform. Where it really shines is the fact that we can take some of these complicated concepts and build better interfaces, better tools for working with them. And so Toddle is actually a lot more about building good tools for building web apps, and a lot less about building pre-made components. We don't actually ship with a single pre-made component. There's nothing in Toddle. Like, you just get HTML, you can style it, and you can you build logic into it, but there's no pre-built components. If you want pre-built components, you can install packages that are built by the community, right? So you can build these high level, as high as you want or complex as you want abstractions, but by default, Toddle doesn't come with any of them. By default, Toddle is all about working directly with the platform. So it gives you the full freedom and flexibility of what the web platform could do, and then allows you to deal with whatever abstraction level you want on top of it.
Other negatives I found were having to pay for more advanced usage of Bubble's plugins. There are also a limited number of plugins which could hinder specific apps. Now, at this stage, you might be asking, fine, there's issues with these no-code app development platforms, but why is it a trap? And I get it. I know that every platform
I think that's a valid question.
Does have its pros and cons. And yes, you can still build functional apps with Flutter Flow and Bubble and other no-code platforms. But the reason why I think it is a trap is twofold. The first fold is that most of the no-code clients don't know how to code, as in haven't ever developed even one line of code. So coming in, the clients don't really have an idea of everything that is involved when you create some sort of app. Because I was experienced in coding, I could tell pretty early on that there were specific things I couldn't do. And that was a red flag to me.
So I think this is a really good point, and it's very true, and we see that quite a lot with people coming to Toddle. Again, we get a lot of people that are asking questions like, can you build this kind of app in Toddle? Can you build that kind of app in Toddle? And basically because, I mean, if you're just starting out and you're looking at the landscape of no-code tools and what you need, like everyone, you know, all of it says you can build apps in it, and all of them says you can build like production grade app, because production grade is not really a term that has any real meaning. Like, everyone will have their own idea of what that means. My idea of what production grade is might differ quite a lot from what other people mean is production grade, right? So it is a really hard landscape to navigate early on. And what we see a lot is people will gravitate towards the platform that seems easiest. That makes a ton of sense, and it is often actually a pretty good idea. But then you realize very late that actually that platform is not going to be able to support you the whole way, right? So I think that's a real issue. I don't know that there's a simple solution to that, other than maybe we should start not promoting this idea that you're going to pick up a tool and build an app in like a week. Because while that is definitely possible, it might not actually be the thing you're looking for. So I think no-code is still something you need, like no-code platform is still a thing you need to learn, you need to explore a little bit about. I don't think this idea that anyone can just jump in and build the next SaaS application, that's going to have 1 million users. That's not really a realistic promise. It's technically anybody can, but before they get there, they will be doing a lot of development, a lot of learning, and actually becoming a decent programmer, right?
I can picture someone maybe not knowing how to code, buying a platform like Bubble or Flutter Flow, developing until 90%, spending a lot of time and hours, and then just can't actually complete it because of the restrictions. And that's
yeah. I mean, and we are seeing that. We hear a lot of stories from our users of people that are saying, well, I tried this platform and then I realized I couldn't do this thing, and I tried that platform and then I couldn't do this thing, and eventually ended up with Toddle. That's a story we hear all the time. And the reality is that doesn't necessarily mean Toddle is always the right platform for you, because you might not have those requirements. But I think it's good to understand, is this going to be a short-term project? Is this going to be something that I want to spend a week or a month about, get built? I'm okay with being relaxed about the requirements and kind of figure out how to make it work. It's okay. You're okay with being flexible on things like customization and some feature requirements, or do you want that full control? Do you want it to be exactly like your vision? Right? This is something you need to sort of figure out ahead of time.
It's a first issue. The second issue is that you can't actually build good, unique apps with these no-code platforms. And this is the common issue. The main complaint for any no-code platforms is that you can't customize it. So either you develop a very run-of-the-mill common app, or you don't build anything at all. And this would be fine. It actually would be perfectly fine if the no-code platforms were a bit more.
So, yeah, I mean, I obviously don't think that's true, since I built Toddle, and the whole premise of Toddle is that you don't have to make that trade-off, right? That you don't have to give up customization and flexibility just because you're now in a visual programming environment. But of course, in doing that, we made some other trade-offs, right? So Toddle is less drag and drop, just plop a new component in for a user list, etc., than other platforms, right? We're sort of, if I mentioned Softer before, right? Where Softer will let you build an app really, really quickly, and it'll probably look like a Softer app, but they look great, right? So if that's not a problem, that it looks like a Softer app, and it has the things, and you're happy with the functionality, that's a much faster way to get going, right? And if you're not someone who's gonna, build a career around programming or web development, I think that's a perfect tool, right? That's the right one. Toddle, on the other hand, is we say it's built for professionals, and that also applies if you're someone who's in the process of becoming a professional, right? But it's for people who want to spend the time and learn how to do it, want to build really interesting user experience and really well-performing and really delightful web applications. That's what we built Toddle for, and that is, I think, first of all, a different user segment, and it's a different approach. And of course, I would somewhat agree with her in her statement. Obviously, I think Toddle, she didn't include us in this, right? Probably didn't know about Toddle. But this was very much the same experience I had when I looked into no-code while I was building Toddle. There are a lot of platforms that are really impressive, that can do a lot of things, but none of them were able to support me in the kind of development I wanted to do, because I wanted that freedom, I wanted that flexibility, I wanted to be able to build applications that were highly scalable and very performant, and also delightful to use, right? And that's not what no-code traditionally has been about. It's been about build things really quickly, get it out, and kind of then build the next thing, right?
Bit more honest with it. They just aren't. In their marketing materials, in their demo videos, they phrase things differently. If you look at these no-code development platforms, look at their websites, you always get the sense that, wow, this no-code development platform can do it all. This is Bubble's front page. The world's only full-stack no-code platform. Design, develop, and launch production-grade applications without code. It doesn't matter if you're starting out or you are an enterprise team, Bubble is for anyone.
I will say, to be fair, saying that you're the only no-code full-stack platform isn't technically promising anything. It's obviously not true. There are plenty of full-stack no-code platforms, but it is. I don't think you can say that's an oversell. And again, as I say, production grade applications, I mean, sure, but that has a different meaning for different people, right? It's true that enterprise teams can build something in Bubble, but like we're never going to see an enterprise who build their product around that, right? That's a different use case entirely. It's a different kind of scale. It's a whole different ballgame. And that's just not what that tool is for, right? That's just not what it's built for.
Here is Flutter Flow. Build applications faster than ever. Create beautiful UI, generate clean code, deploy the app to the App Store or web in one click, fully extensible with custom.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know Flutter Flow very well, so I don't want to comment on anything specific. I do think it's weird to say generate clean code because, again, that seems to only be relevant if your platform is failing, right? If it's doing what it's supposed to do, the users shouldn't care, right? Like I don't understand why that's necessarily a selling point. Fully extensible with custom code, I absolutely I get why that's a custom, like that's a great selling point, right? And it should be, and I think that should be possible for any no-code platform to sort of really deliver on that promise. If it's true that it falls short there, and I don't know, I don't want to presume. I only have this lady's word for it, but if that's true, that's unfortunate, of course.
Custom code. I've used Flutter Flow. That is the furthest definition of Flutter Flow there is. When I downloaded that code base, it was terrible. I would have never been able to deploy my app on Flutter Flow unless I probably got an experienced Flutter dev to go and fix that messy code, sort out the errors, and then only I would have probably deployed it. Because obviously if there's errors in your code, the iOS store would immediately reject it. And it really is okay if these no-code platforms market themselves as a platform that gets you the minimum viable product quickly. So if you want to show clients a quick MVP or a proof of concept, go ahead and use something like Bubble and Flutter Flow. It's great. We'll do that for you. But if you want a full-grade, production-ready app, you have to do it the old-fashioned way. So why are they marketing it like this? And when you do speak to any developer who has worked on these tools, if you speak to web developers, if you speak to mobile app developers, they actually tell you the same thing. They tell you that if you want to use a product like Flutter Flow or Bubble or any other no-code tool, it's good for something simple, something quick. It's terrible with customization. It's terrible with scalability. Do it the old-fashioned way. So if you are thinking about no-code, which is fine, I think first do your research. But second, also understand that no-code app development platforms will always be second best to actually just sitting down and coding or paying an experienced developer to create your mobile app. It will be a lot more expensive, but you'll actually get it done right the first time. Thank you so much.
So I think in her conclusion here, she's painting with a fairly broad brush, right? And I think she's kind of putting all of no-code into the same box. And to be fair, I think that happens all the time with no-code. The reality, no-code tools really doesn't have that much in common. Generally, you have everything from like a very simple static page builder where you can configure only a few things to a very complex workflow scenario, right? Like, there's not that much of a red thread, if we're being honest. And so I think there's very few things you can say about no-code as a whole that holds true for all these tools. And I think, for example, I mentioned Glider before. I think Glider I don't think that would count as a trap. I think that's a platform that's quite clear about what's possible, right? You have these blocks, whatever you can do with those blocks, that's something you can accomplish in Glider. And like, other than that, you're not expecting to be able to customize everything after that. That's not what the platform is for. It allows you to build simple applications really, really quickly. If you're looking for something very customizable and very scalable, there are other tools for that, right? And I will say her experience here really matches my own very well when I looked into the no-code space a few years back when I started building Toddle. And I reached the same conclusion, that there are really impressive tools out there. I was very impressed with what was on the market. Like, you can do a lot and you can build a lot of things really, really quickly. But none of them was anything I could use for the kind of applications I normally build. So I came from a background of building like apps for startups, scale-ups, or enterprise companies, and usually their main product. And that has a certain set of requirements when it comes to performance, when it comes to scalability, also around collaboration, like you often a whole team working on the same platform at the same time. And at the time, there was no platform on the market that was able to match that. And so my conclusion was actually very much the same as saying, for an MVP or a very simple project, this could be a good solution, but it's not something you can scale and build larger solutions in, right? And that is really the point. Like, that is why I started Toddle. That's what we wanted to change. It's a very different set of trade-offs that we've went through. It's a different focus area with Toddle. We focus a lot on building a tool and having the tool make programming easier. And so, again, simplifying through better tooling instead of by higher level abstractions, right? So in Toddle, you don't have any of the abstractions. You start out with plain HTML, and you can create those abstractions yourself. So if you want to work at a higher level, you can go and create your own components and reuse them as much as you want. You can even share them with other people through packages. But by default, Toddle doesn't come with anything like that, because it's built to give you that full control and make sure that you're never going to hit that invisible wall of no code where you suddenly realize that you made a mistake and this platform is not actually going to be able to support you going forward, right? And that's the one premise that we said, like, we want to make sure that that never happens, that we're never going to force you to move off the platform because it cannot handle the requirements you have. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you thought this was informative. I actually thought this was a really good video. She was obviously very direct. I think maybe on purpose a bit provocative, which I think generally drums up some interest. But I also think she made some really sensible points. So I'd love to know what you thought. Please leave a comment below.